Okay, good afternoon and welcome everybody. We'll give this about 30 to 60 seconds as folks enter and filter into the webinar. As you join us today, feel free to put your name, organization, where you're tuning in from into the chat. If at any point in time you have a question for the presenters, feel free to drop that into the Q&A box. Okay, great. We'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon and welcome to the Workforce Workplace Disability Summit 2021. Diversity includes disability. My name is Lori Becker and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Starkloff Disability Institute. For individuals who are joining us who are blind or low vision, I am a middle-aged woman with pinkish color skin. I have chin-length auburn hair that is straight. Today I'm wearing black rimmed glasses and a sleeveless orange top and gold earrings. So on behalf of our board and staff, I want to thank you very much for joining us for this first session of a four-part series to celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month. We want to thank our generous sponsors whose financial support has allowed us to provide this content at no charge to participants throughout the month of October. And those sponsors are the Champions of Inclusion sponsor is the Centene Corporation, and our barrier-free sponsors are Cigna, Express Scripts, and Nestle Purina Pet Care. Thank you as well to our community sponsors, Greater St. Louis Inc. and SHRM of Greater St. Louis. In addition to these outstanding companies, we want to recognize and thank the more than 50 partner companies that work with SDI throughout the year. We are proud to work alongside you on your journey to disability equity and inclusion in your workforce. And thank you to our partners at SHRM of Greater St. Louis for co-sponsoring this event series. Each webinar is worth 1 hour of both SHRM and HRCI recertification credit, and a special welcome to our SHRM members joining us today. And speaking of a special welcome, we have with us today Miss Valerie Patton. Valerie Patton has spent the last 2 decades building, leading, and designing diversity and inclusion strategies. Currently, Val serves as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer and President of the Greater St. Louis Foundation at Greater St. Louis Inc. Her work focuses on the organization's Inclusive Business Solutions Initiative. In 2006, Val founded the Fellows Experience Leadership Program, which is a year-long program to support and advance the careers of rising professionals of color. Since the program began, it has over 900 graduates. Val has been featured in Black Enterprise and Diversity Inc. magazine, along with many other numerous national and local publications. Val's roots are in the IS and IT business world, where she held positions in project management, supplier diversity, budget analysis, and many others at Southwestern Bell, now AT&T, and Bank of America. Val is community focused and serves on numerous boards, including the United Way of Greater St. Louis, of which we are a proud member agency. Val holds also many degrees, including her MSW from Washington University and an honorary doctorate from Harris Stowe. And let me just say, I shortened that bio quite a bit. There's a lot. Oh, so Val, thank you so much for joining us today and providing some welcome remarks to us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Lori, for that introduction. I never know who people are talking about when they introduce me. I'm very humbled, honored, and blessed to have the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you today to give you an overview of Greater St. Louis Inc., along with a few welcoming remarks. But I am an African-American female woman who is mature. I am a medium brown, tan complexion, wearing some smoke framed glasses because I am a bit sight impaired too. And I have on a yellow jacket, and I have a silver key necklace around my neck and a blue and white striped top, along with some blue slacks and some blue leather tennis shoes today. One of the advantages of COVID was to get out of heels. So I have not had heels on but 3 times in the last 18 months. But that is how I look today. And I have black and gray hair. Seems to mean that I'm getting more and more gray hair. And it is in a bob style. So that is a little bit about how I am looking today. But I am very, very humbled to have this opportunity. As we know, disabilities look differently in many different forms. As I am suffering from a disability that people cannot see. And that disability would be, I am very, very dyslexic. So I see things backwards, I read things backwards, and a lot of times I write things backwards, which makes it kind of fun for me in the fact that I am a writer. So sometimes to see some of the things that I come up with, especially when I'm really tired, is amazing. But as we move into this thing that we've created called Greater St. Louis, Inc., which is a merger of 5 economic development organizations. And the merger took place on January 1 of this year. But it is really, how do we attract, retain, expand, engage our business community in many, many different ways. Today, many of my peers are at the America Center at GeoInt, which is around the geospatial industry. Lori introduced in my introduction the Fellows Experience Program, which is around creating the next set of multicultural leaders in our region. And 2 of your panelists are graduates of the Fellows Experience today. Also, we work with minority-owned companies to grow, scale, and advance them. If you'd like to know more about Greater St. Louis, Inc., I would invite you to go to our website, www.greaterstlinc.com. And with that, I just want to say welcome to the Workforce Disability Summit. Everybody needs to be included in the workforce. Everybody has a place in the workforce. What we need to do as practitioners is get our businesses to recognize that everybody comes to the workplace with something to offer. Let us build on what people do well, opposed to excluding them from having a livable wage and with the accommodations that they need. So I'm a champion. One of those many awards that Lori did not talk about was the Champion for All award that I got from Webster University. And being a champion for all is being inclusive, making sure that everybody is treated in an equitable way, and that they have access to what they need, and that there is pay equity that is also engaged in that holistic view of the person. So we all have a little something, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I only have 20/20 vision when I have my eyeglasses on. As I've already said, I've read things backwards, write things backwards. So we all have something, and some people can see those disabilities and some people cannot. But at the end of the day, we are all in this together. And I want you to know that I am very humbled and honored to have the opportunity to work with the Starkloff Institute and many other institutes in our region, in our state, and in our country that embrace those who may not be completely able. So thank you for attending today. Thank you for the warm introduction. And I think now it goes back to Lori so she can welcome this phenomenal panel that you will hear from.
Val, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us and share your story as well. And for all of the work that Greater St. Louis Inc. is doing for inclusive job growth for the entire region. Greatly appreciate your work and your help and support throughout this month. So we are going to charge ahead with our planned activities for today. Want to get this set here. As a person with low vision myself, I'm going to be navigating a couple of different screens and magnification tools over here. So if I'm looking to my left, this is my big teleprompter. So want to mention that SDI is dedicated to advancing disability inclusion in all aspects of society, and especially in the workforce. And by joining us today, you have chosen to center the voice of the disability community in your DEI conversation. Because of our rich history in the disability rights movement, and as a disability-led and run organization, we know and understand best the barriers that prevent our people from equal inclusion and belonging in the workforce. So thank you for choosing to join us today and to center the voice and the expertise of the disability community in your workforces. And so today we are excited to begin this series by reinforcing our message that diversity includes disability. And how do we do this? And that is by infusing disability into your disability equity into your DEI strategy. And to discuss this, we have tapped some DEI leaders here in the region who have achieved success in this area. These are individuals who manage comprehensive DEI plans in their organizations. So our panel includes, please welcome Vincent Flewellen. He is the Chief Diversity Officer at Webster University, where he reports directly to the Chancellor and provides key leadership to the university's core value of advancing diversity and inclusion. Vincent has been weaving diversity and inclusion into the educational programs and institutions for nearly 20 years. Adewale Soluade, Wale, as we call him, is a Nigerian-born American citizen, and he is the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Centene Corporation. In his capacity, he is responsible for overseeing the design, implementation, and continuous improvement of the company's diversity and inclusion programs and policies. Also joining us is Dawn Higgins, who is currently a Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Nestle Purina Pet Care. Dawn has a 25-year career in human resources. So welcome to all of you. Thank you. So much expertise in DEI strategies here in this Zoom room, so thank you. So we have some questions that we've prepared, and we're going to start out by talking a little bit in a general term. Our research shows us that many companies surveyed still do not include disability in the diversity and inclusion statements. So why do you think this is, and why is including disability in your DEI statement important? And to start this one off, I think I think Wale was going to start with this one.
Yeah, I can go ahead and kick us off here. Thank you, Lori. So, from our perspective, we are very intentional about inclusion within our workforce. When we talk about disability in the workplace environment, there are a couple of things that I think many organizations know, but don't necessarily know how to take action on, right? So for example, the fact that people with disabilities make up the third largest labor segment, market segment in the United States, yet there is a bit of hesitation around how an organization creates an equitable and inclusive environment for this population. I think there's still a number of preconceived notions that cause some unwarranted hesitation in communicating that an organization is interested in having people with disabilities represented in their workforce. I think there are some concerns that sometimes permeate the environment around, well, what will that look like? Will our people leaders be able to lead just as effectively? Will we still be able to get the work done in the way that we envision? And of course, the I think hesitation that can sometimes come when folks are so fearful of saying or doing the wrong thing and causing offense that they just don't approach a situation at all. So I would say that that's what I've generally found to be the cause for hesitation in including disability in DEI statements.
Mm-hmm. And why is it important that we do? I know the companies represented here, many companies that we work with do include disability in their statements. So can you talk about a little bit about the advantages of including those statements?
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, it boils down to having a representative workforce, right? So I can't think of a single company that's going to come out and say, hey, we don't exist to serve X segment of our society, right? No one's going to come out and say that. But a lot of companies are also willing or happy to jump out and say, yeah, we're representative of the communities that we serve. Well, are you really, right? So I think the reality has to be that you have to make the commitment, and then you have to take the action to bring that commitment to life.
May I add and follow up on that? I so agree with what Wale has said. No company is going to, in the good, consciousness, come out and say, this does not matter to us, right? But I do think that while companies come out and make statements, the reality of it is, how does it then show up, right? And so to say that you are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? What does that actually look like within your organization? It's very easy for us to, on pen and paper, come out with a statement. And many of us saw those statements, certainly after the murder of George Floyd, right? Many statements came and were flying across the screens and media outlets, right? But the reality of it is, today, how many of those companies are, in fact, showing up for that work? Well, the same is said when we talk about the work of our colleagues who, I so very much appreciated Valerie mentioning her own, disabilities, right? And some of which are unseen, some of which, for me, I too am sitting here wearing a pair of glasses that are necessary for me and my function and my reality of life, right? Along with my salt and pepper, gray hairs and my beard, but what does it then look like to actually show up and to truly be inclusive? And I do think that it is critically important. Our workforce, we know, I'm looking at Dawn's tagline behind, under her piece, and that is, no one of us is as good as all of us, right? And we know that so much improvement in terms of diversity of thought, the productivity of work is made only better when we show up reflective of as diverse of communities in which we live, but we have to be very intentional about that work. We have to really strive to not only attract that diversity and being intentional in that work, but that we have to be very intentional in terms of how we also retain that diversity, right? And it's so easy for us to talk about diversity, and diversity is so like bottom level, right? Like it is so easy. I think all organizations for the most part have diverse workforces. Question becomes, how inclusive are you in those workforces? How equitable are you in those workforces in terms of access to promotions, right? And so that's really, I think, where much of the work really is for us, is making sure that we are inclusive in our workspaces, making sure that we are creating equitable access for everyone within our workspaces.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Vincent, appreciate it. Dawn, do you have anything to add to that statement?
That was well said by both gentlemen.
Okay, great. Well, I wanted to move on to we talked a little bit about a couple of things you mentioned, made me think about leadership commitment to, because a lot of this work begins with buy-in from top leaders. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of that, and maybe what leadership commitment looks like at your organization?
I'll jump in if that's okay. This is Dawn Higgins with Nestle Purina Pet Care, and I'm just thankful to be here with you all this afternoon. So thank you for the invitation, Lori. I'm an African-American female, and I am sitting in my work office, but I have a background of a variety of cats and dogs sitting at the table, because it's about bringing everyone to the table in our organization. And I have long black hair and a red shirt and gold earrings and jewelry and red lipstick on. So when I think about the leadership for me, it's setting the tone for an organization, and seeing people as people. And I think it's important in what I see at our organization, honestly, is for our leaders to lead inclusively, which requires our leaders to be active and to be intentional, right? It's about trust and transparency. And our leaders are engaged. For example, we do a lot of great work with partnership with SEI, and having our leaders being a part of the programming with Dream Big, that comes to mind, because that's just one of our favorite opportunities with Starkloff, is the Dream Big. But having our leaders being a part of the programming and speaking to the students and getting engaged with the students. It's our leaders being transparent about and being vulnerable about what it is that they may be experiencing, and sharing some of their own personal stories with their team or with the broader organization. It's helping with self-ID campaigns and sharing information on our social media channels and in workplace sites, internally or externally. But it's also, I think, ensuring that the members of those leaders and their teams having that, as I heard Vincent say, having that equitable access to training or to other enhancement tools for them to perform, to thrive, and develop in their individual careers. It's about encouraging those different interactive process should an individual need some type of accommodation or some assistance. So in the 3 years that I've been actively, let's say, engaged in DEI as a full-time role, I've always been active in it, but as a full-time, a role, if you will, I have not had any of the leaders say to me that they can't do something. It's more about, what do you need me to do? So they honestly have been champions where we need to plug and have them help or assist or promote. So that's what I feel, or that's what I see at my organization at Purina.
Dawn, thanks for sharing that. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. First, apologies for not sharing a bit about myself. So I am an African-American male, currently wearing a brown and tan houndstooth suit with a light blue shirt and a navy tie. I also wear glasses because I've worn them since I was 10 and definitely need them to see. It's the first thing I reach for in the morning. A little bit of a low beard and no hair on my head. The joys of getting older, right? So I want to chime in on the leadership commitment question, because ultimately that's where it all starts. That sets the tone for how an organization advances diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at Centene, I'm very proud to say that it starts right at the top with our CEO. He has been clear from day one that this is not just a value that the organization has, but it's it's a strategic imperative for us, right? So what we serve the most vulnerable communities as an organization, and that absolutely in our society includes the disabled community. And so for us, it's always been about how do we ensure that this is embedded in everything that we do. And one of the very first actions that we took as an organization was to create the Centene National Disability Advisory Council, which is led actually by Colleen Starkloff. And that council guides our direction as it relates to all things disability, both in how we serve our members as well as how we drive inclusion within our workforce. They ask us the tough questions, the things that we might not even think about. They help us surface those ideas. But then we take it a step further by, to Dawn's point, making sure that leadership is visible in this conversation, right? So our CEO was one of the first to sign the CEO letter on disability inclusion, essentially a call to action for CEOs, investors, companies, and just business professionals to advance equitable practices for people with disabilities. And he continues to put his voice out there about how this absolutely has to be a priority in our society, because creating that equitable access to work, creating that equitable access to healthcare benefits everyone as a whole.
So Wale and Dawn, let me ask you, what if you're, a director or a manager at a company that might not have that buy-in from the top? What advice would you give to someone who's looking to to get more commitment from their leadership? Any advice?
I think it starts with making sure that your leadership knows that this is something that you value, that's important to you, right? Because in today's environment, I think most people will tell you that it is a candidate's market, right? It is an employee's market. And so if these are things that you hold and believe in the value of, you make that clear to your leaders. If you as a people leader or hiring manager are telling your direct leader or the talent acquisition team that, hey, I absolutely want my candidate slates to include people with disabilities, guess what? It matters to you, so now you've made it matter to them. And that's what we've got to also build, right, within organizations, that we can't sit back as individuals and think that we can't influence the culture, we can't influence the direction. If we say that this matters to us, organizations, your companies care and they want to take that action. But sometimes it takes each of us speaking up and saying, this is critical, this is important to our success. We are missing this perspective at the table, and I need to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to get that perspective at the table.
Right. I mean, I still agree with that. I think it is really using your voice and showing and stating the importance of that. When I think about our Purina Ability Advocates, that's our grassroots efforts of, again, showing the importance of getting together. It honestly was getting together with other associates who had children who may have a disability. And so, but then it has grown to be much more okay, we may have children, but how does that then transfer into the workplace? and how can we ensure that we are having representation throughout the organization, right? And where we might be fundamentally missing a great talent or a pipeline of talent. So I think using that voice and sharing and showing to your managers, your leaders, this is important, and this is why it's important. So I think I've seen that happen, firsthand. I haven't seen. I guess I must work for a great organization because I mean they're like, what do we need to do? So use that voice, use your influence. We all have a lot of power and privilege.
So tell me a little bit, let's get into a little bit of specifics here, whether it is things that have been highly successful or areas in which that have been more challenging. Let's start off with some of the challenges, maybe. And initially, when you began to try to infuse disability inclusion into your overall DEI strategic plan, or maybe not just challenges, maybe some uncertainty. What were those challenges and how did you face them?
I think, when we talk in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, it's a priority for so many people, right? It's real, right? Those of us who are part of any marginalized identity group, it's like, it's already too late, right? Like these conversations are too late. But what we have to also realize is that we are a part of a bureaucratic system that has been created as a system in many ways to intentionally exclude people, right? And so as we are working to change that mindset, both institutionally, personally, as well as socially, right? It's work, and it takes a long time for that to happen. It does. That's the reality. And that's something that I have learned, right? I think of the 50-year-old Vincent versus the 18-year-old Vincent versus the 23-year-old Vincent, like, who was looking for immediate change, right? Like, what do you mean it's going to take long? Like, why, right? Now, as I sit in this role and in the positions in which I've sat previously, I now understand the why much better, right? Mm-hmm. But what I am excited about is, hearing from my colleagues who have spoken on the previous question about the personal commitment, right? The professional commitment. I think organizationally, it's critically important, right? My role reports directly to the chancellor because it sends a strong message to our community, right? That when I give a call on behalf of the office of the chancellor to question or to guide, then that means that I'm calling on behalf of the chancellor, right? And therefore I get answered differently, right? Like, you see the importance of this. And so elevating the roles, for one, I think is an important piece in terms of helping to move the needle, right? Like, mm-hmm. making sure that your CEO, your chancellor, your president, buys into this work and sends a message that says that this work matters, right? Here at the university, we have the University Accessibility Committee, right? That is made up of our students, made up of our faculty, made up of our staff members. And we are able to examine the work that we're doing well as the work that needs to be done. And we have to acknowledge that there is work to be done on all fronts when we talk about diversity, right? Around and sadly, I think in many ways around disability, that's in some ways, in some spaces, sadly but true, one of those afterthought pieces when we talk about diversity. And it's an unfortunate piece that so often we don't think about that, right? And so for us to have a committee that says, but you must think about this, right? You must make it a priority in your work, in your planning, right? And to celebrate the fact, yeah, you can access our buildings, right? Every building has an auto button that allows for you to access, and every building has a ramp to make sure that elevators are accessible to everyone, right? But the reality of it is that this is a campus that, 1915, right? We have buildings on this campus that are not fully accessible, right? So what does that then mean, right? Well, we cannot host events in those buildings, right? That means classrooms cannot gather in those buildings, right? And we have to be really clear about that and remind folks about that from time to time, right? And to hold folks accountable for the fact that when we say we are accessible for all, we are accessible for all, right? And that then means that we have to do campus tours from time to time to see where our blind spots are. Which buildings have created a challenge, right? Which buildings, though we think we've done well on, in actuality, we have not done well on, right? And so sometimes it's really holding that mirror up in front of you and having to really see the realities of what is reflected back to you and to be able to own that and to be able to move forward. And so, you know, our University Accessibility Committee, in terms of an academic year, they meet every month with, I think, the exception of November, right? But they are meeting during the academic year regularly and having those hard conversations. And then bringing forth that information and their findings to me so that I can then, from my position, advocate on their behalf as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing all that, Vincent. And I just want to make sure that everybody does, just kind of as a reflection point, you know, our civil rights law wasn't passed until 1990, you know, so it is the last, we're the last kids to be invited to the party. So, you know, and that rule, you know, 503 didn't come into effect until really get teeth until 2014. So, that's okay. We're here to acknowledge that. And we, you know, we are all here in the space where we are right now. And that's okay. So we're going to, you know, continue to move forward together. Wally, did you have something you wanted to add on about any specifically in terms of any particular challenges or things while you were implementing you know, a comprehensive DEI plan?
Yeah, you know, I think we have, in some instances, what I consider a somewhat unique challenge, right? So Vincent mentioned holding up the mirror to examine where you are and be candid. And one of the ways we do that is by participating in benchmarking surveys such as the National Organization on Disability and the Disability Equality Index surveys, right? And so our team is very intentional about not just completing those for the purpose of recognition, but more so for the identification of areas of opportunity. However, when you come back and you get the result and it says you scored 100 on the DEI index, it can sometimes create this false sense of confidence across all levels of the workforce, right? And what we know is reality is that we always have work to do, right? We've always got people leaders. We've always got individuals that could be a lot more intentional about bringing that DEI strategy to life, and specifically the inclusion of people with disabilities. And so the challenge sometimes can be helping people to understand that this is iterative work, right? And this is continuous work. Let's not sit back and hold up the 100 and essentially say, we've arrived, because I guarantee you there's someone out there that does not feel included, that does not feel that sense of equity. And we have to be vigilant and very intentional in ensuring that all of us are doing the work that it takes to advance that. And especially for people leaders who might manage individuals with disabilities, being intentional about building relationships so that you truly understand what your employee needs to be successful, right? And so I think the challenge there is just continuing to keep that top of mind for every single one person that works at Centene.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what the gentleman has said, because, you know, while on one instance of participating in those benchmark surveys and getting a great score, it's like, wow, that's awesome. But that work, like you said, never stops. It's continuous. It's really around, I look at those surveys is really opportunities, right? So sometimes I don't know if I necessarily always look at it as a challenge, but where is the opportunity to see people as people? And where is the opportunity for our organization to continue to be intentional about embedding disability into our DEI strategy, and understanding that whether we see the disability or not, it already exists in our workplace. And there's so many people who are not necessarily disclosing for whatever those reasons are, but it's us then partnering with our other partners across our organization, HR departments, our site services departments, IT for digital accessibility tools, for facility enhancements, the hiring process. Are we being inclusive in those areas, of course. But I guess if there is, so to speak, a challenge, I think part of that is also staying abreast, right, of the changing landscape of what a disability is, visible or invisible, and the wide range of support that individuals individually need in an organization. Different accessibility tools, crafting I say in air quotes, comprehensive plan. Because when you think about comprehensive, after a while, like somebody's going to feel probably left out of something, right? We're not going to get 100% across, but how do our practices and our facilities create conditions that make it difficult for people with disabilities to fully, right, contribute into the workplace? So that could be a challenge when we're thinking about a comprehensive plan, and what are those barriers that we as temporarily able-bodied people might be putting our plans together for, right? How that affects the population, and how as a company do we continue to educate and bring that awareness to our associates, to our managers, so they can be that inclusive leader in building a disability-friendly, inclusive work environment where we all can thrive. So if I had to think of a challenge, that might be the challenge, and we don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So thanks for kind of digging deep there. Again, I want to go the other direction. If you want to share some insight into a particular program or an opportunity or something that you have found specifically kind of successful in your area in terms of in your disability inclusion planning, whether it be through the process or an outcome, something you're particularly proud of or that has been very successful.
I would say at Purina, when I think about all the identities that we bring in to work, it's really the real conversation, okay? The real conversations that we've had in the organization, which we refer to as our Connect, Challenge, and Change sessions. So our listening sessions and our table of 8, where people have been brave enough to really bring their full selves into these conversations, to really be transparent and authentic about what it is that they are going through in their lives, not just at work, but in their personal lives, and how that is playing a part in who they are, and having the leaders be a part of those conversations, whether they are sharing or whether they are listening. For us, it really begins with listening for understanding, and not to judge, and not to respond, and not to say, oh yeah, but no. It's really to listen to that person's lived experience, and let that person share, right? And not be involved to counterpoint and give and try to one up their lived experience. And so that for us has been a really, I think, eye-opening experience. And it really started because of, I will say, after the murder of George Floyd, really opening that up. And, I'm excited about the one that we'll be doing this month around disabilities. So that for us has been very eye-opening, our Connect, Challenge, Change listening sessions and our table of 8.
They sound really wonderful. That's great.
I would echo a lot of what Donna said around having candid conversations, right? Having these authentic conversations. And so at Centene, we have a pretty similar structure. We've got our courageous conversations at Centene, and this year we've actually sort of dug in on this idea of allyship, right? Thinking about the intersectionality of identities and really exploring what does it look like to be an ally across various dimensions of diversity. There's some research out there that shows that you've got this vast majority of folks in the work environment that would say that, yes, I am an ally, but then when actually asked, you know, how do you demonstrate that, that percentage just like plummets, right? And so it's one thing to talk about it, but it's something else to actually do it. And the first step for us is you have to see the humanity, the shared humanity in our colleagues. And so we drive those through those courageous conversations. We drive those, we also have something that we call real talk at Centene, and it is just that unvarnished, we assume positive intent in this conversation, but you get to ask what you need to ask, you get frank answers, and then we move ahead, right, in those conversations. But then also for us, and this is what, you know, I would almost consider this low-hanging fruit, but if done well, really yields some amazing result, right? So we have an employee network that focuses on employees with disabilities and caregivers, and we listen to them. You know, it's not just we want to have these networks so that we can check that box, but we actually listen to them. We actually resource them so that we can tap into the benefit of having employees who are willing to already dedicate their extra time to drive inclusion and equity within the organization. And it's amazing some of the things that you learn, right? Everything from just accessibility from a technology standpoint to what accessibility and inclusion looks like from a cultural standpoint, right? But so many organizations have these networks and they sort of use them as the food, fun, and flags deal versus, hey, how can we truly move the needle on our inclusive workplace? And that's what we're all about at Centene.
I would say that, you know, in addition to what both Dawn and Wale have said, I think in many ways Webster University has done that as well. But I think what's unique for us as an academic institution is that we host an annual diversity, equity, and inclusion conference. And I've been here for 3 years, and I've been proud of the fact that at our DEI conference, right, we have been very intentional about creating a space and a platform to hear those lived experiences of individuals who have a story that is so different than so many, and I love Dawn's use of the word, you know, temporarily, you know, able-bodied individuals, right? And so making sure that we have a platform in which individuals with disability are able to share their story, right? And whatever that story or stories is and are, right? They get to tell that story and get to tell it before an audience of folks who have come to learn more, right? And I think that has been a real pleasure and win for us here at the university, is being able to provide that platform to have those stories shared with a broader community of folks who are interested in DEI work. And so that's been great. And we've been able to host the Starkloff Disability Institute as one of those featured panel sessions. And so creating those opportunities to share that story with a broader audience is, I think, one of our great successes.
It's great. Yeah, those are fabulous conferences. Thank you for reminding us about those. We have a question about intersectionality. And I think a lot of what you've all been talking about kind of points in that direction, listening to the voices. As you know, disability is an identity that can also intersect with any other identity, any gender, any color, any age, although it is definitely more prevalent in certain age groups and certain, you know, races. So I want to ask if you have, in your experience, intentionally worked to cross collaborate with, between ERGs, or have you seen, disability intersect intentionally or unintentionally in your work?
Oh, absolutely. And so much so that we actually have that expectation. You mentioned ERGs. Our employee networks are expected to work together, right? And really explore this idea of intersectionality. And for us as an organization, we're focused on how do we grow that competency, that awareness across the organization. So even if you as an employee are not part of one of our networks, or you don't necessarily sign up to attend the various programs that we offer, right? How are we still putting this information in front of you, helping people understand what we mean when we say diversity? Because at the end of the day, there are no single dimension humans within our organization, and emphasizing that diversity applies to everyone, and that there are certain aspects, at certain dimensions that we're going to move through, helps people recognize that this is very much an intersectional conversation, right? No one shows up just as one thing, and therefore we also cannot make assumptions about anyone based on how they present, right? And so we every year determine what we call our enterprise area of focus around DEI. And so I mentioned earlier that this year it was allyship, and next year it's about digging into intersectionality because of some of the conversations that we've had around allyship, right? That you can, for example, be an ally for the disabled community, but also be a veteran, right? And there are some places that, again, they're just straightforward. You're going to see a lot more of that. But then there are other considerations. So when we talk about being an individual with a disability that's not visible, well, what does that mean, right? What privileges exist there? What opportunities exist there? And how can we take the identity that might be more so at the forefront for you with that invisible disability and bring that together, right? And create an environment where people are able and willing to, one, share, but also understand that, again, their invisible disability doesn't mean that they are going to get any negative treatment or experience within the organization, but that they can actually be a catalyst for others within the organization, right? So we're proud that every year we continue to grow the representation of people with disabilities in our workforce, but we also know deep down that there's so many people out there that still are not willing to raise their hand and say, yes, I have a disability. You might not ever, you'll never know if I don't tell you, but how can we get comfortable and safe to have that conversation and be a champion for others?
What he said.
I know, ditto. I'm just
Okay.
Yep.
Great. And I know we're getting kind of close to the end, but one of the questions in the chat really relates directly to what you just said, Wale, was that there are individuals who have disabilities that are covered under the ADA that are not visible. That could include people who are deaf or people who have chronic conditions, or they not visible, or maybe they don't consider themselves as having a disability. So the question was then, how do you ensure that these people also feel recognized and included in your diversity efforts?
I don't. That's always a thing. Even when I go back to talking about strategically trying to build this comprehensive plan, right? And I put in quotes comprehensive because there's always going to be a dimension or dynamic that probably we're going to miss for whatever reason, maybe lack of experience, understanding, etc. But I think that if as an organization here, we're constantly and consistently, I think, showing up to show. I go back to those conversations because I think for us, with having that open dialogue of those listening sessions and bringing in these different identities of individuals, because the intersectionality in those conversations definitely comes out. And seeing your fellow colleague to be vulnerable, to express maybe they have this invisible disability that they are suffering with a chronic pain, but they were brave enough to share that. And sometimes that we have seen has allowed another individual to say, you know what, that's me too. And that you've allowed that space for me to come to work, to share, and to know that it's okay and there's no repercussions from me being my authentic self, that has then sparked other people to say, you know what, I'm going to be okay. They see me as me. They see my value to the organization. And when I think about values of our organization, there are 4 values that we stand true by of respect for ourselves, because it has to start with you. Inclusion starts with you. It starts with I. Respect for each other, respect for diversity, and then respect for the future. So I think if you're doing things in place to see the good intent, and that we all matter, as no one of us is as good as all of us, then that might help other people to feel like, you know what, they value me, they see me, they're allowing this opportunity for me to be me.
I just want to add to that piece or rather underscore the need for, particularly for those of us in leadership positions, right, to really be willing to show up in our most authentic self, or, so that we can then model for others what that is, right? And so for here, at the university, for me, one of the things I always, in this position when I applied, and I think my last position prior to this, is being upfront, right, about being able to embrace my own identity as a Black gay man, right? And you talk about the intersectionality piece. And the reason I say that is I want other students, I want other colleagues to know, as Dawn just said, that it's okay, right? And that I will be okay in sharing that identity piece. Now, I'm not trying to make that comparison of being gay to that of, having a disability, but it is one of those things that in many ways is also something that is unseen. It's a part of an unseen identity. And by sharing that, I let others know that it is okay. And hopefully it can then transcend in terms of maybe someone with an unseen identity around disability is also then able to come forward and to share that as well.
Absolutely. You're right on point there, Vincent, in terms of owning our identities. And so that is what we promote very much at the Starkloff Disability Institute. So with that, we are right at time. I want to thank all of you for your participation today. Dawn and Vincent and Wale, great contributions to this conversation. I see there was another question in the chat. I'm going to shoot it over to the participants and make sure that they get you an answer. Thank you for that. Here on the screen, you can see our codes for SHRM and HCRI, as well as my contact information for those of you who are seeking recertification credit. I also want to point you back to our website, starkloff.org/WWDS, for additional resources, including 31 days of NDEAM activities that you can share in your workplace and in your home to make for a more disability inclusive culture. Also, everyone who's registered will be receiving, along with the replay of this, a free summary sheet with download with tips and best practices that were covered in this session. So that is going to be, I think, very helpful for everybody to share. So thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.